Can you start a podcast with me, please? I need something to do.
Pastrnak sent it out in front of Malkin to save. They score! Elias Lindholm looks to the heavens.
Here's a chance. Potter right in and goal. He scores. Oh my! What a move by the rookie.
2-on-1. Pastrnak moving in with Marchand. Get it to it. Score!
The zone. Coyle dances in. Backhand score!
Lindholm right wing corner. Pastrnak is there. He scores! David Pastrnak wins it for Boston.
Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of Bruins Tape to Tape. I'm your host today, Caroline with a K, and I am joined by my fantastic co-host, Maria from Watertown. How are you, Maria?
I'm great. I think I'm great. I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I'm not sure if it's all the pollen I swallowed on the golf course yesterday because we finally had a beautiful weekend in New England. Saturday and Sunday was absolutely awesome, but feeling a little bit droopy today, but enjoying the nice summer weather. How about you? How was your weekend?
It was pretty good. The weather was fantastic. It definitely feels like summer now, and you're 100% correct. Everything has fully exploded since this past weekend. And I am also feeling it with the allergies. I'm
Oh my God. I feel like a truck hit me, but no one wants to hear my sad tales of, well, we're here to talk about some hockey.
Exactly. As a brief table setting, today's episode, we're going to be talking about a couple of players that I'm not sure that we've fallen out of love with all of them, but we know that there have been a lot of criticisms and question marks at various points during the season around four players in particular: Hampus Lindholm, Elias Lindholm, Mason Lohrei, and Andrew Peeke. And two of those, the Lindholms, are long-term contracts.
I wish we had video so they could see me gagging with regard to those two contracts.
So those are not going anywhere anytime soon. The odds of anything happening with either of these players in the near future, slim to none, but it doesn't mean that we can't talk about them and what happened and what we're satisfied with or dissatisfied with. And then the other two being Andrew Peeke and Mason Lohrei. Mason Lohrei is finishing his first year of his contract, and he only has one more year left. And then Andrew Peeke has come to the end of his 3-year contract, 2 of which were in Boston after trade. So we'll talk a little bit about him. Before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about NHL news and things that are going on. First and foremost, because it is still the playoffs. Look, I know you can't predict how many teams are going to play only 4 games and how many teams are going to play 7 games. But I feel like having one of those teams start the second round before the first round was over may have been a bad idea, because the Carolina Hurricanes actually have set a modern record for longest wait between playoff series. It's pretty insane. So we're recording today on the 18th. As of yesterday, Carolina has 11 days rest between Game 4 of the second round and Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Final.
That can't be appealing to the coaching staff. It just can't.
Yeah. Again, we've talked about this many times. There are pros and cons. When you've already been playing a tough season, and all seasons are tough, but then this year was particularly demanding on every player being so concentrated. Is it going to be difficult for Carolina to get back on the horse and play an intense every other day schedule? Or is the winner of the Buffalo Habs series going to still be standing after, for one team, a 6-7 first and second round, or the other team 7-7 games second round? I don't know what to expect. It's like the two opposites coming together, but that's been an interesting.
I expect Carolina looks like they are a well-oiled machine this season. They may come out a little bit slow to start in that first period of whoever their opponent is going to be, but they seem to be a team on a mission. And I would venture to guess and would put a bet on the fact that they'll be ready to roll, because this means a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals. It means getting a huge monkey off your back, which maybe they already feel like they have at this point in time because they've moved on to the Eastern Conference Finals, which has been a knock on Rob Brind'Amour teams in the past. And I think it's more difficult for the team that's coming in because this series between Buffalo and Montreal has been pretty physical. So whatever little nagging things that players on both teams have had could likely have gotten a bit worse because there is no downtime in between these games.
Yeah.
To get yourself right.
And the amount of preparation time, granted, Carolina doesn't know necessarily who they're going to play, but they have the time to evaluate.
They've had plenty of time because they only have to look at two teams right now.
They've probably been watching the series. They understand. They see what happens. They can exploit some of that. For Montreal and for Buffalo, it doesn't serve either team to look at anyone else other than the team that they're currently playing. To do so would be foolish, a waste of time. And if you want to talk about superstitions, it's certainly a very efficient way to piss off the hockey gods, I'm sure. And on the flip side, we have a game 7 because I don't know what the hell happened with Montreal.
Wow. I mean, Montreal looked to be in control of that game to the point that I was like, you know what, I'm feeling a little worn out and tired here. Yeah. I'm just going to call it a night. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm like, what the hell happened? Holy shit. Then I saw some stuff on social media about questioning Marty St. Louis and leaving Dobish in there.
8-3.
Oh my God. On home ice, too. Listen, say what we will about the Canadians, and because they're hated rivals here, but that building and those fans are unbelievable. At one point, the building was so loud that I could barely hear, which doesn't bother me, what Ray Ferraro was saying in between benches because I can't stand to listen to him, to be perfectly honest with you. But the crowd was absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know what else happened as well because I actually had been out all day. And again, with the weather and everything, I just passed out. I knew it was tied at 3 when I went to sleep. And holy cow, it is incredibly difficult to close out a series when you have the ability to do so. And
it's funny because both teams have young players on them. So you might be able to say maybe that's the youngness and the inexperience of a team. But, you know, I'm speaking of referring to Montreal, kind of the moment the lights are too bright for them. Yeah. But Buffalo also has. But I think Buffalo has a little bit more veteran leadership than Montreal does. Because, you know, we haven't seen Brendan Gallagher about one time in this series. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what the lineup is for tonight's game in Buffalo, but it's game 7. Bring it on.
Yeah, it's just been a fascinating game to observe and track these teams in a way that I haven't really in particular all season. But what I found most interesting about that game was the fact that when it came to the shots on goal, once again, Montreal was really held to low shot volume compared to Buffalo. And that was, I think, the biggest deal.
We're doing that in the Tampa series as well.
Yeah, and I didn't get to watch what was happening necessarily defensively because, again, I was asleep and I wasn't going to watch it.
I mean, let's be honest. We care about hockey. Yes. But when our team isn't in it, we watch it with one eye open. Let's face it.
I don't feel bad about going to bed if I'm tired.
I don't either.
So what happened? Was it a defensive breakdown? Was Buffalo all of a sudden that much more energy to be offensive? Were the Montreal skaters too nervous? I would hesitate to place any blame on Dobby because I'm not that type of person to just blanketly blame a goaltender because it's not always the case.
No, but there are those shots that on occasion you say, geez, that was a bad one to let in. If you're making honest assessments, those goals do happen. But I do agree with you. It's really hard to dump on your goaltender when the said goaltender is under siege in some instances. Right. And the guys in front of you either can't or aren't doing their jobs.
Agreed. And I think looking at the other end for Buffalo, it's also been very fascinating that they haven't had one single goalie that they have been able to just tap and say, you're the guy, like most teams have a true and dedicated starter, and that guy has played almost the entire series for any of these teams except for Buffalo. And I guess I would appreciate, on the two flip sides of not pulling Dobby in, what was it, not game 6, game 5, because that was a smart thing to do, to trust in the goalie, to let him get settled, but also to not be afraid to pull the trigger when you need to.
It panned out for Marty St. Louis. Yeah.
It's a fun series to watch. I look forward to a game 7.
It just validated for me, too, watching these two teams, that the Bruins better be looking over their shoulder in terms of teams that are going to be difficult outs moving forward in the regular season. And I'm not saying, Donnie, I know you probably don't listen to our podcast, but I wish you would sometimes. I'm not saying build a team to chase these teams. Build the team, okay? Build the team in the manner in which you want to play. Pick a lane and build the team in that direction.
I agree. I think building a team around chasing a particular team is short-sighted and foolish.
It is foolish.
Here we are.
We've been there, done that. Has it worked out for us yet? No.
Not spectacularly, no.
We digress.
And the last two other pieces, well, a couple of other pieces of news outside of the playoffs, although tangentially related. Vegas Golden Knights have actually faced some consequences related to their not following of the rules. Now, granted, at first blush, one might think, wow, that's overkill. But then again, this is Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights have forfeited a second-round pick for this year, so they have effectively nothing to pick.
Nothing to pick. No pick for them.
This year. And it's all because Tortorella said no thank you to the media.
And they won the game. They won the series, which makes it... And listen, I love my torts, but you idiot. Every team is obligated to speak to the media, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think this punishment goes deeper than not making yourself available for media availability. So to set the whole punishment in full, Vegas has had their draft pick taken away from them for the upcoming draft, and John Tortorella was fined $100,000.
Yep.
I think it goes deeper than that, because I think this started with the suspension of Braden McNabb in the Anaheim series for one game. Vegas was pissed about it. They were very vocal about it. Then Vegas denies Bruce Cassidy the opportunity to interview for an open coaching position. Then they do this. So at some point, when you're running the league and you sit back and you say to yourself, who the hell do they think they are? To me, that was like institutional arrogance as far as I'm concerned. And I have no problem with the fact that the league came down on them as hard as they did. I think it was deserved. Yes. I hope it teaches them a lesson. I hope it makes them somewhat. It won't. It likely won't. But I don't know if they think they can get away with this shit because the league set them up so beautifully when they came in as an expansion team and went to the Stanley Cup Finals in their first season. That doesn't make you the golden child. That doesn't mean that you can do whatever the hell you want and you don't get in trouble at some point in time.
I mean, Vegas is the petulant child demanding everything of the league. There's arguably nothing likable about the Vegas Golden Knights. There's nothing culturally admirable. They picked Carter Hart. They picked up his contract. That alone is just abhorrent. But the fact that the way that they play, the product on the ice, the attitude of the owners, I mean, I don't know for a fact, but quite frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if the owners then just paid the fine for Tortorella, because
that's normally how it works.
They knew that about him, that he is a person who...
You knew what you were bringing into your house. You're bringing in the good, the bad, and the ugly into your house. However, I think there's always a straw that breaks the camel's back. This like kind of middle finger to the league. And I think some of it does stem from the Braden McNabb suspension. Too bad, so sad. You still won the freaking series. What is your beef?
Right.
What is your beef?
Right.
What point are you making by not making anybody available to the media post-game?
They didn't think that they could get away with it. They just didn't care.
They didn't care. Now, I don't know if they're going to appeal it or not. I don't know if there's any kind of an appeal. And honestly, I don't care enough to dig down deep to figure that out, to be honest with you. But I'm glad that the league finally took a stand against an organization who thinks they can just treat everybody however they freaking feel like.
Yeah. Well, I think I speak for a lot of people in saying I hope that Colorado absolutely obliterates them in the Western Conference.
I agree. If that series goes 5 games, I'll be surprised. But
I don't know. Both teams are getting some rest because, again, thanks to the scheduling and thanks to the Montreal Canadiens and Buffalo Sabres, everyone gets rest except for them.
Yeah. Cal McCarr needs as much rest as he can get because it sounds like his shoulder is hanging on by a thread.
He's been beaten up quite a bit. Speaking of punishments doled out by the league, Charlie McAvoy, we didn't get a chance to talk about this before, but 6-game suspension to start the season in the fall for his attempted troubaing of a Buffalo player. And again, we've said this before. This is something that we think the league should take seriously, that we have been extremely vocal about ever since Jacob Trouba used his stick as a bat to Trent Frederick's head and did not receive any kind of penalty.
Anything, not even a friggin' penalty, right? No fine.
Not even penalty on the ice. And since then, we have seen the league start to take that seriously, vindicating to us that they realize, we screwed that up.
This was the error of our ways.
And you do see this getting called more and more. Now, as we discussed in our Discord, which everyone should join in and check us out, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Not surprised whatsoever that the league came down fairly harshly on Charlie McAvoy. I was, however, at the sheer number of games, I was expecting 3 or 4, especially considering it was more of an attempted troubaing.
But what did I say when we discussed it? When you have an in-person hearing, you're looking at a minimum of 6 games. That's the threshold. When they call you into the principal's office, you're getting 6 games.
Yeah.
And he has been suspended twice before. He is now viewed as a repeat offender. Those records don't get expunged. It doesn't go away from one season to the next. You can say, this happened 3 years ago. It doesn't matter to the league anymore. It doesn't matter. Now, if we're going to be calling out this stuff when it happens to players on our team, right? That was stupid. I get you're pissed off. There was a slew foot in there. It either was ignored or wasn't seen. I understand all of that.
Punch him. Don't use your stick as a weapon.
Correct. I have no sympathy for Charlie in this instance. None.
That's the dumbest thing he could have done.
None.
Yep. That was one of the dumbest reactions he could ever possibly have in that situation, and that's what you get. I would like to point out one other thing that I did not pop onto our little agenda. I did see, and I want to say, we said it here first, but I saw just this past week, I followed WEI on Instagram, and somebody on one of their shows was talking about captaincy in the future and flirting with the idea of bringing someone in from the outside, a la Zdeno Chara in 2006. And when I saw that, I thought, we said it here first, folks. We said it here first, if it happens.
We have talked about it, and I love Pasta, but I'm still not sure that the next captain of the Boston Bruins is on the current roster. I'm just not.
Yeah. It doesn't feel as much of a given as it had been in previous years.
Oh, and one more special thing. Yes. The list of Hall of Fame nominees has come out for 2026. And who is on that list?
Several. But the one that we care the most about, Patrice Bergeron.
If he is not a unanimous first ballot Hall of Famer, then there's something wrong with the people who get votes.
Agreed.
Sorry. David Krejci is also on that list. Bill Kessel, who I was surprised when I looked down at the list with some impressive stats. Yeah, I almost chuckled when I saw Louis Eriksson's name on there. I mean, he's got some pretty good stats, but I'm like, Louis Eriksson? I don't know. But
it's June 22nd, so we will be sure to have something out for that, because that is the day that they vote and we find out.
Not surprising. It shouldn't be surprising to anybody that Patrice Bergeron is on that list as a first year. So congrats to him.
And then the last thing, I almost forgot. There's a little bit of a rumor already flying around about next year's roster. And there's an article out on Nesson right now. Are the Bruins going to sign Darren Radish? He is a right shot D. And the question is, of course, can someone like Radish give Boston enough transition value to justify using a more stable, lower upside option? Meaning, is he coming in potentially as a replacement for a defenseman, or is he potentially coming in just as a supplement to a left D, for example, Mason Lohrei? Those are the questions. Who knows if it's going to happen? Granted, this is coming from Fluto with some very specific term and money, so there has to be some legitimacy to the idea, but business might be starting to percolate amongst the other teams in the league.
Well, you know how I feel. You can't have enough good defensemen.
True.
I don't think we have enough really good defensemen on this team right now.
Agreed. Well, and we're going to talk about 3 of them right now. So the idea to talk about these 4 players in particular came to us because these were names that have come up with some frequency, either here on this podcast or in general from our Discord, our social media presence, just having eyes and ears. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to do a super brief background on each of the players, kind of what their situation was this year. I'm going to talk stats. Maria's going to talk vibes, and then we'll see how we feel about them. Now, again, the Lindholms, let's be honest, they're not going anywhere. So we can talk about them first, and then we'll talk about the other 2. So let's talk about Elias, okay? This year, he finished his second season off of a 7-year-long contract, 7.75 AAV. He's 31 years old. He has basically no trade for the entire length of the contract. He played 69 out of 82 games. He was expected to score 18 and a half goals. He scored 17 goals, and he had 31 assists. So this is a guy who came in. I think the general idea when he was brought in as part of his signing was the number 1 center, steady Eddie, quote unquote, replace Bergeron and Krejci, although obviously not to their caliber, but having somebody who could come in and be a consistent center. He effectively played exactly the same this year as last year. So on the plus side, performing in a consistent way. The problem is it's not the job that he's supposed to be playing. Now, in his defense, this is not the first time that the Boston Bruins have placed an expectation on a player or taken a player and put him in a position role, quote unquote role, that maybe is not who he is as a player. We've seen this before, okay?
We've seen this movie before, yes.
This is not me saying that, and I'm sure for you, Maria, as well, this is not you saying he's a bad hockey player or not a good player. But the fact of the matter is, this is a guy who was signed to be the number 1 center.
He couldn't even be your number 2 center in some instances this season. He got pushed down to the 3rd line center.
And in reality, a lot of his performance and his abilities more closely align with what you would expect from a solid 3rd line center, like a Charlie Coyle. Boston saw him as someone who could be a good matchup deployment utility player. He was absorbing difficult defensive situations relatively responsibly. You know, he wasn't being particularly sheltered, but ultimately his impact was more reflective of a useful middle 6 as opposed to the elite 2-way anchor that you need to have as a good 1C. He was responsible, but his impact not particularly spectacular. Now, obviously, the other significant issue is while he is totally fine, good, middle-of-the-road player, he is 31 with 5 more years left on a contract, and he is making $7.75 a year. And he's been put in a role that he is not particularly suited.
This is such a bad situation for the Bruins to have put themselves in Look, the back issue, to me now, I view it as a chronic back issue. This back issue started when he came to us in August of 2024, right? He came into training camp with
got
this
hurt.
back issue, hurt, right? And something that apparently bothered him throughout the season. We now have just finished another season, and we've heard about this back injury yet again. You're paying him like he's, say, in between a number one, number two center. You yourselves have had to push him down to a third line center. And there were instances that even when he was healthy and playing, I didn't notice him on the ice.
Yeah.
And so I am of the mindset that if there's a way to remove yourself from this player and this contract, that I think it's time to seriously consider doing so. Now, maybe you can say the organization set him up to fail. This is not new to the Boston Bruins. But then why would you hand him the boatload of money that you did and the term that you did? You had to have known there was something going on with this guy's back even before he came to you. I don't know. This is a player that I would work overtime this season to try and cut my losses with.
Yeah.
You need that money. Even if it's only a portion of it, you need that money in other areas.
Most realistic scenario is obviously he stays in Boston. But I think for me, what I would like to see next season.
It's so bad though, but are you going to put him as second or third line? That's a shit ton of money.
I know. That's the thing. He is overpaid for what he's producing in the role that he was hired to play. I think considering, the economics of it, I would rather, even though I don't think it's the right financial move, I think it's the right move for the team that he plays third line, plays a middle six position. I understand that he is then going to be overpaid for playing a middle six position.
That's a lot of money to bury in the third line center.
But what are you going to do? You're going to then force him to be in a position that he's not really excelling at and then costing games? Or
listen, if Sweeney found a way to unload the David Backes contract, he needs to find a way to unload this contract too.
If you look just at his stats, he's not even necessarily making a positive impact on goals above replacement or wins above replacement or even standings points. Granted, most of the guys that we're going to talk about today all did worse this year than last year. So is this a transition issue? Not everyone did worse. I want to make that clear. Not every Boston Bruin was worse this season compared to last, but a lot of them were, and pretty much all of the guys we're going to talk about are worse. I get the financial piece, and if there's nobody else, then there's nobody else, but that's kind of where we're at 2 years in with 2 years worth of data. Then he played all the games last year in spite of being injured. He just then played through it, and then this year he didn't play games.
Which is admirable, but if you're taking the ice and I'm not noticing you for periods of time and you're not able to contribute in some manner, then what are we doing here? I ask you, for $7.75 million freaking dollars.
Yeah. And you want to talk about another person who has a very hefty contract. Let's switch gears then over to Hampus Lindholm. So this is a guy who was on your radar this season, mostly because he was pissing you off. And rightly so. Although, fun fact, this might shock you. This was not his highest number of penalty minutes season in his career. It was actually only his second worst. But he's been increasing in his penalty minutes almost every season, year over year, since the beginning of his career. But some background, he came to Boston via a trade and then signed an immediate extension. So he had an 8-year contract with an average annual value of $6.5 million. He's halfway through this contract already, and he's 32 years old. And this season, this was his first season back after breaking his kneecap at the very start of the season last year. And he still was in and out with some injury. I don't know that we really heard about his health situation and what was going on with him. He played 67 games. but he was pretty much right on the money in terms of his expected goals was a 4.6, and he scored 5 goals. He had 21 assists and a pretty respectable defensive points share. He had a 2.8, which is decent for a defenseman, an okay goals above replacement, and 0.5 wins above replacement. So useful, but definitely not what we all remember Hampus as, which was from 3 seasons ago, where he was just an absolute machine. Based on some of my research into his numbers and everything, I think, and I'm going to speak for myself, you can tell me if this is kind of also your thought pattern with him, but for me, I have felt that he's not been himself for a while. However, I think I have been using that perfect season and his unreal performance that season as the standard baseline of the kind of hockey that Hampus Lindholm plays. And in looking a little bit further back into his past, into his time with Anaheim, unfortunately, I think the way that we saw him play this season is closer to his baseline skills and his performance, not what we saw. He's a transition-oriented, two-way stabilizing defenseman. And what we saw, that offensive, significant assists, granted, that perfect season, he only scored 10 goals, but he had some ridiculous number of assists. I think the Hampus that we have seen this season is the Hampus that we get. And I don't know how that makes you feel. Or
it doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me feel good because, again, you feel like you're sold a bill of goods, right? Because what we saw from the early part of Hampus coming to Boston, the expectation was, and he showed us that
almost immediately
with his fluid movement, his ability to carry the puck in to the offensive zone, was strong defensively. But these injuries that have mounted up now have either hindered his ability or had an impact on his ability to skate explosively in the manner in which we saw him. Let's call a spade a spade. Charlie McAvoy lost the quarterback position on Unit 1 of the power play because Hampus Lindholm was a better option.
Right.
And his first shift, QBing the power play, is when he got hurt. So that experiment went down the toilet in a hurry. But how many of us had been saying, get Charlie Mack off that Unit 1 QB, get Hampus out there? So my expectations, and maybe it's unfair to the player, but I'm basing it on what I saw your first year here with us, where I'm like, you're a joy to watch. I enjoyed watching you play. Where this year it was like, dude, I'm going to take your stick and I'm going to put it where the sun doesn't shine if you get one more stick infraction penalty all season long. All season long.
Yeah. I am now a little bit worried about him, knowing now that the season that we saw from him this year is likely what we are to expect and see moving forward into the future. I don't know what his remaining time in Boston is going to look like. You know, he's probably going, if he stays on this contract, if they don't move him, if they don't trade him, he's likely to finish his career in Boston. It's a lot of money, and the cap is going up, and his percent of the cap is always going to start to go down. I don't know if it's who he has as a partner, if something was still off, because again, I don't believe we know what his issues were, but he's one that has been then ultimately a little disappointing, unfortunately, to say the least. But
he has also a contract that is not easy to move. And I've said it in our Discord group, and I think I've said it on our pod as well. Those, the Lindholm contracts, and I put them both together because they're not appealing contracts. And again, easier said than done. But if there's an opportunity to move those contracts.
Yeah. Speaking of someone who we've all had very different expectations of, especially going into this season, Mason Lohrei.
This is, believe it or not, even though I've crapped all over this kid, this is a tough one because you don't want to wave the white flag on a young kid, especially a defenseman, because we all know it takes longer for defensemen to mature in the NHL than it does forwards.
Yes. There's a lot more that a defenseman has to learn about their position, about reading and understanding everything that's going on on the ice. That's why goalies take even longer to develop, because they have to take in even more information and understand it and apply all of their skill set. When I started prepping for this episode, I said, and even before the end of the season, there's no way that this kid is staying on this roster. There's no way.
Well, I don't even know if the Bruins want him on the roster, because we heard the rumored trade potential packages during the trade deadline, and his name was always in them.
And his season didn't actually end up on paper. It did not end up actually worse than it looked. This year, significantly better in terms of your favorite stat, the plus minus. He was a plus 17.
And I know that's not the be-all, end-all stat, but it still counts for something.
And here's the thing. So the two defensemen that we're going to talk about, and we can even maybe talk a little bit of comparison. Peeke and Lohrei, they are certainly not first pair. Second pair maybe for Peeke. Third for Peeke. Third for Lohrei. Lohrei had started in the first pairing because he is an offensive defenseman, right? So he's got a lot of offensive transition value. He's got a lot of good puck moving, and his possession driving ability is good. Granted, he's not as strong on the puck as I think we would like him to be, but again, he's like 25 years old and a string bean.
Right.
I don't know what you want to expect from him. Whereas Andrew Peeke, he is a defensive defenseman. Think what Brandon Carlo had been on this team is what Andrew Peeke is. Now, for Mason Lohrei, he signed a 2-year, $3.2 million AAV contract. Again, he is a high-talent offensive puck mover. That's who he is. That's all he ever will be. He will always be a defenseman. You can't just switch to being a forward. There's a lot involved in having that happen. The contract was signed with someone who is a defenseman, an offensive defenseman. Those are very high-value positions in the NHL. Even if he's somewhat volatile on paper, if you have constructed a well-rounded team, his mistakes can be relatively easily forgiven and smoothed over by the team that's out there with him. Ultimately, in terms of what he cost this team out on the ice, once they got him off of the top line, it really wasn't that damaging. You know, he still had a 3.4 defensive points share. That in spite of those 5 games over the course of 77 games played, 5 of them were completely disastrous. He wasn't the only one performing completely disastrously, and he still had a 3.4 defensive points share. Now, granted, his goals above replacement were, and the wins above replacement were negative, but not horrible. So he was performing as you would expect someone who is all of 25 and is offensive. At his best, he can carry the puck cleanly through transition. He can extend the offensive zone possession. He creates passing lanes, and he activates offensively without necessarily creating too much chaos. But again, the issue is his decision making. He overhandles. He has poor reads under pressure. Risky pinches.
But again, we've made the point that he's young and it takes time. This is not, the Boston Bruins is not the developmental team. That's the Providence Bruins, right? They brought the kid up. Maybe they brought him up too early, which is their want to do. But sometimes we wonder about this organization's ability to make those decisions and to make good judgments about when a young player is ready or not ready to play. But I will give Mason Lohrei credit for he had been healthy scratched and missed, I forget how many games he had missed as a healthy scratch.
5
4 or
games.
5?
5 games, yep.
And he came back and he played well after those scratches. He does have continued upside. He does have a very team-friendly, although I think we said it when we first heard the deal that 3.2 was a little too much, but it's still, in the terms of salary, it's still a relatively friendly salary, and he has 1 more year left. So that player could be of interest to another team if you're looking to fill priority openings that you have currently on your own roster.
Yeah. It's a reasonable salary for the type of player that he is. Maybe not him specifically, but for his type, his archetype, the offensive defenseman, again, they have a higher value. That's just how it is. And while going into this offseason, I was 100% convinced that they were going to move him. I'm not 100% sure that that would happen, at least in the offseason. It all depends on what they can get in exchange for him, because I do think he has a high value. And if they won't just trade him willy-nilly, I think.
No. And nor should they, because he should be viewed as an asset and keep him for another year. But if a team approaches you and says, hey, ABCD, you should be listening, right?
Yeah. And not for picks, not for prospects. I think he's enough of a value that I would want bodies.
You're not going to get a 1-to-1 for Mason Lohrei, right?
No.
You're going to have to have something in addition to Mason Lohrei to make a hockey trade. And let's face facts, right? As much as I shit on Sweeney and Neely, I will give Sweeney credit for knowing how to make hockey trades.
Right.
What he's not as good at is identifying talent and putting a dollar value to that talent, as we can see from some of the contracts that we have just discussed currently on this roster and even past contracts.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also depends on, to your point earlier, what kind of team is the Boston Bruins team going to be? Because Lohrei was brought up while Jim Montgomery was the head coach, and his system, his approach was a very active and involved D. Well, a young player like Mason Lohrei is going to fit into a system like that extremely well because he is very offensive minded. In fact, he's probably the most offensively minded defenseman on the team. And so he fit that system really well. But now we have a different coach who is trying to take the Bruins back to their defensive roots. And that is something that he does not fit into because he is too far on the offensive side. And I think what made Boston so successful for so long prior to the chaos of the last 5 years is the Boston Bruins had a very clear and very defined identity. The team is this. This is what it means to play Boston Bruins hockey. And it didn't matter who the coach was because that approach, the things that they valued in terms of how they played the game, stayed consistent across multitude of coaches, right? Now, over the last 5 years, basically since the very end of Cassidy and through Montgomery, through Sturm, it almost seems like the coaching style is what is determining, or other factors outside of the team are deciding how to play the hockey. And then, so if that's the case, then you're making roster decisions based on how well can this player fit into this particular system, when the person who is deciding what that system is could be gone much faster, much easier than any player, right? So I think that's the larger issue, is that Boston has to either go back to the identity that they've always had, which is something that there are still plenty of players who fit into that identity, who played under that identity, or figure out who you are now and stick to it as part of a larger, longer term plan and pick players who can fit that, because the players stick around longer than a coach. And I think Mason Lohrei is a casualty of that poor decision-making. I think that's ultimately what it is. And as much as I've liked him and I've enjoyed, for the most part, watching him play and seeing how he plays, because he's very different than the rest of the defensemen, I just don't think that he is the right fit anymore. And so the question is, when does he get traded? Because his contract will end next season. Okay.
And you need to get something for him. If you don't think he's a fit for your future build, because we've never heard his name brought up in that regard, right? I mean, we haven't heard it publicly. We hear about this new core. And it seems like from what I'm reading, they want to make Pavel Zacha a long-term Bruin as well. Where do all these other guys fit in? And if they don't fit in, you can't just let them walk. Right. You shouldn't for nothing.
Andrew Peeke, he's an interesting one to me because I've always enjoyed his game. Now, we put him on this list because you brought to my attention that a number of Bruins fans within the population of the nation have beef with him, whether it was from specific incidences or general play. This is not necessarily my take, but I'm definitely going to be interested to hear because you listen to all of the local sports talk radio. So Peeke is finishing off his 3-year contract for very little money, 2.75 AAV. He played 2 seasons of this 3-season contract with Boston after being traded from Columbus. He is a defensive defenseman. He's really like a unicorn in that regard when you think about the regulars of the defensive corps. Now, he's an interesting one because I also looked at some of my favorite stats in terms of player usage. Your favorite stat, the plus minus. He did not have a good season. He was a minus 12, which was the worst. Which, hey, compared to last year, okay, we'll take it. He had 5 goals. Was more than was expected, 9 assists. He had an all right, reasonably respectable defensive points share of a 1.75, but his goals above replacement, not spectacular, minus 9, and his wins above replacement were minus 1.5. Now, it seems like it's not good, but he had very high usage in difficult deployment situations, which really shows a lot of coaches' trust and identifying his reliability when it comes to his defensive responsibilities. Even if you have a player like him and they're defending really, really hard, at the end of the day, because of this particular season, the puck was in our defensive zone way too frequently. So he had a lot of extra work that had to be done. But he survived it. He ate a lot of those minutes, and he ultimately ended up being a somewhat reliable. I believe he was for a good stretch on the PK. Granted, the PK wasn't particularly awesome at the very end, but again, it doesn't matter who the cast of characters is. That's kind of, I would call that a wash. He's definitely a quieter type of defenseman, especially in today's NHL, where you're getting more attention paid to those offensive defensemen or those two-way players. He's defense first. That's his job. That's his home. So I'm curious to hear, what are the people saying in terms of why they are displeased with him? Because a competent third line defenseman, he falls within the salary expectation. He is a right shot. Those are rarer. The defensive defenseman, rare. Those kinds of defensemen, they retain a lot of value with the coaching staff. So what we see and value with players like him, very different in reality with what coaching staff sees and values. Tell me about his deal then.
I think the issue, and it's maybe through no fault of his own, is Andrew Peeke should be viewed as a depth guy. He should not be viewed as someone who is part of your regular recurring, logging lots of minutes type of defenseman. And I think there were instances that, and you can say this about just about anybody on the Bruins team, but he was exposed defensively on certain occasions. I look at a guy like Andrew Peeke, and as much as I love myself a stay-at-home defenseman on a team, I also term him as what I refer to as a jag, just another guy. And so when you're trying to retool, rebuild, how many jags are you going to maintain on your roster when you need your next full team? Okay. And so you have decisions to make. And then there's Andrew Peeke is a right shot defenseman, as is Henri Jokiharju. But as we alluded to earlier on in this podcast, their Bruins are rumored to be interested in another right shot defenseman who has a bit of a more proven track record. So I think Andrew Peeke will end up being somewhat of a casualty of this roster. I would be surprised if Andrew Peeke is back in a Bruins uniform in the upcoming season. And he's been a serviceable player. He is a serviceable player. But you need more than that when you're building your team from the back end moving forward. Is he part of that rebuild? I don't think so. But what do I know?
It just is going to come down to, what does this team want in terms of not just their whole team identity, but their defensive identity?
And don't get me wrong, you need some of those guys on your roster. But if you're going to stand up there and tell me that you want to be back in the thick of things to contend for the Stanley Cup, then you've got to minimize the number of Jags you have on your team.
His one potential saving grace is the fact that he is the stay-at-home defenseman and nobody else is. I don't know how that fits into the plan to what the Bruins want in terms of what they want their defense to look like overall. I wouldn't be surprised if they let him walk in a month and a half, in 6 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised.
They may just say to him, go out and see what's out there. If someone's making you an offer, come back and talk to us. If we think we can match it, or if we think it's, hey, you're better served to go there, right? Because they don't have piles of cash to just be throwing around this offseason.
Yeah.
I think their status is somewhat up in the air. I think that's the best and the most accurate thing we can say on this podcast on May 18th.
It's not a question of, can the Bruins make it work with what they have? Absolutely. They did this year. And if they had to do it again next year, I don't think I would be disappointed.
But you can't be relying on your goalies to save your ass game after game. When you're giving up, what were they? It's 6th or 7th team in the league giving up the most high danger scoring opportunities. That's not a great stat. And for Don Sweeney to sit there and say, our goalies made the saves.
You shouldn't put him in that position.
What the fuck, Don?
I would hate to see someone like Andrew Peeke go, because I've been satisfied.
For the most part, I have been too. But when you're in the process of doing what the Bruins are doing right now, there are casualties to your roster. And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions. This might be a hard one for them to make. But if someone calls you up and blows you over for an offer that, hey, Mason Lohrei and one of your draft picks or whatever, for something else that you're like, ooh, this could help us in the future, then of course you're going to take that under advisement, if not jump on it.
Exactly. We have 44 days until free agency. So in the span of 44 days, we may start to see some trades, especially as we get closer and closer to the Stanley Cup Finals. And then we will see how much this Boston Bruins roster changes or doesn't change.
And if it doesn't change, boy, oh boy, going into next season, the amount of criticism that will be levied at Don Sweeney and Cam Neely could be monumental.
Yes.
But it's early. It's very, very early in this whole process of drafting and free agency and potentially making trades that, we'll wait on those conversations.
Yes. And there are a number of players that we haven't even discussed yet, and we will be discussing over the next month, who are coming to the end of their contracts as well, or are entering into a final year. So if they're in their final year, they can be extended. So we'll be talking about them coming up in the next few weeks. We'll be talking about Victor Arvidsson. That's an interesting conversation to have.
Yes.
We did a player profile on him last August. And so we're going to take some time to review if our evaluations and our predictions about him were correct. Spoiler, they were. And what we think could or should happen in regards to his contract, because that is one of the ones that's expiring at the end of June. And then we'll also be talking about a young and upcomer that we didn't really even have time to talk about last year, Fraser Minten, and then a review of the free agency signings that happened last year prior to this year's free agency signing, to see, was last year a good free agency year for Boston or not. So those are things that are coming up. Even though there's no Boston Bruins hockey happening, it doesn't mean we don't have something to talk about. But any final thoughts on what we've talked about, Maria?
No, I'm looking forward to Game 7, which is always exciting. It seems like Buffalo, even at this early morning, 11 a.m. hour Eastern Conference time, is very pumped up. Good for them. I think who doesn't love a Game 7? Whether or not you have a dog in the fight, like Game 7s are just unbelievable. Here's what I will say, though. Quickly. I want the officials to swallow their whistles, because they have made themselves way too much of a presence in these Stanley Cup Finals. Let the game be decided 5-on-5 play, unless there's something so freaking egregious that you simply cannot let it go, okay? fine. A stick to the face that draws blood, I get it. But the rest of this bullshit, let the game be decided by the 5 and stay the hell out of the way. Thank you very much.
Hockey gods willing. Make sure you like and subscribe for more content, and be sure to leave a rating and review to help other Bruins fans find us. You can support the podcast by joining our Patreon or following us on our socials at Tape to Tape MK and on Substack at tapetotape.substack.com. Any last words?
Go Bees!
Go Bees. Yay.